Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to Q&A, the show where I take your questions from YouTube and Twitter and answer them here in video format. A ton of questions to be asked before the start of the Browns' second preseason game. And again, if you want to watch that second preseason game with me, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're notified so you can watch the live watch party with me, 1 o'clock on Sunday, of the Browns versus the Giants. If that sounds like something you're interested in, please, please, please hit the subscribe button. Ding that notification bell so you don't miss out on the live stream. We had a lot of fun last week. We're going to have even more fun this week. It's almost going to be like a true preseason game in a way, because it's like it's happening at Sunday at 1, so it's going to just feel like a regular season game more so than not, because it's just the timing and everything else. But anyways, before I go off on a tangent about that, I want to make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ding that notification bell. But now let's jump into your questions, and we're going to start with a question from Joe Stebick, who says, why does everybody think our defensive line is weak? There's reason to believe that the defensive line might not be as strong as some are projecting, mainly because the defensive line right now is heavily reliant on, players who don't have the best track record of consistently showing up or staying healthy. Along that defensive line, there is Jadeveon Clowney, who does not have the most consistent track record. There is Tack McKinley, who does not have the most consistent track record. Even you can argue Andrew Billings does not have the most consistent track record. So I do understand the hesitancy, if there's going to be hesitancy on any part of this Cleveland Browns defense or even team, it's definitely going to be there on the defensive line. And I think the reality is, I don't think the interior of this defensive line is awfully strong. There's Andrew Billings, there's Malik Jackson. I don't know. The more time goes on, the more and more I feel like the release of Sheldon Richardson is going to be something that we're going to come back to at some point in the season and not be extremely happy with. It's a hard-pressed question to answer right now, but, you tell me, do you think the Browns have upgraded in the interior, right? Do you think Andrew Billings and Malik Jackson, do you think that's ultimately going to be better than Larry Ogunjobi and Sheldon Richardson? Now, that pairing had its own issues. We know about Larry Ogunjobi's liability against the run, but it doesn't look like Andrew Billings is much better in what we've seen of him so far in camp. So, again, the question has to be asked, did you upgrade there? And if you didn't, then you got worse, or, maybe you just got just as good. And last year, we know that interior defensive line situation just wasn't good enough. So, yeah, I think it's fair to ask questions about this Cleveland Browns defensive line. Everybody outside of Miles has huge question marks. The next question comes from Mr. Clean 24, who says, what do you expect in joint practices with New York? I'm expecting absolute domination because it's the Giants. Now, I don't know how you measure if it's absolute domination or not. And even then, dominating a team in a training camp practice isn't the same thing as beating them, because, the Browns dominated the Giants once ago, I think with Mike Pettin, the year they won like 3 games. So take it with a grain of salt. But what I will say you'll see some key tests when it comes to certain positions, right, that are going to be interesting. The most interesting test is going to be for Donovan Peoples-Jones. I'm going to go ahead and assume that if there's any physicality at all, Odell's probably not going to practice because he's still recovering from that ACL injury. We know the Browns staff likes to take things safe, like to be more protective than than some would assume they have to be. Maybe a better way to frame it is that they're more protective than they would be if this were the regular season, right? Odell would play if this were the regular season, but since it's not, he ain't going to get into the practice, especially if he ain't going to play in a preseason game. So if that's the case, you're going to get to see a lot of Donovan Peoples-Jones against James Bradberry. And let me tell you something. If Donovan Peoples-Jones has a great practice against James Bradberry, who's one of the better corners in the NFC, you got something. And that's really going to tell you where on this barometer of DPJ's development is he. Is he ready for a third wide receiver role? Is he ready for, slightly more extended targets? Or is he ready to be a main contributor on this offense? And does that change how you align things from a wide receiver standpoint, because he can beat number one corners, off the line of scrimmage and not be a liability if he does have another team's ace corner on him? If that's the case, that accelerates things. And that will tell you a lot more than what preseason games would tell you, right? Because those are repeated snaps against somebody who knows what you're going to do, and you just got to beat him to the spot. And if he can do that against James Bradberry, that will be the most important thing you can learn. On the other side, look, we know the Giants have a really good defensive line, but we know the Browns have a really good offensive line, so you're not really going to learn that much there. Daniel Jones, look, at the secondary has a good game against Daniel Jones, or a good set of practices versus Daniel Jones. That's not really like news or anything extra intriguing, just because you should probably have a good outing against a Daniel Jones if you expect to be where the Browns expect to be, especially with the investment that they put on the defense. But I will say this will probably be the biggest test for a Donovan Peoples-Jones, him going up against James Bradberry. That would be what I would be most excited to watch when it comes to those practices. The next question comes from Nicholas, who says, "Hey Q, love the vids. How do you think the D-line will perform without Tack if he doesn't play? And either way, do you think the new defense can be top 10 unit in the NFL in 2021? As far as Tack not being there, how do I think they can perform? There is a question of how well this defense is built to withstand attrition. And the reason I asked that is something I brought up in the AFC North Talk video earlier this week, is you got a lot of guys on this defense that have a lot of injury questions, right? That you can get unfortunate, and a lot of these guys go down at the same time. That's really going to stretch the attrition ability. I guess that's not a word, but you guys know what I'm trying to say, of this defense. And what I mean by that is Myles Garrett, star player, somebody misses, some games during the year. We know Jadeveon Clowney has an extended injury history. Takk McKinley, everything he's going through right now aside, we know he's had an injury history in the past. And then you look at Denzel Ward, injury history. Greedy Williams, massive injury history. Greg Newsome, there's some injury history there. Grant Delpit, he's coming off of a torn Achilles, and he has a hamstring right now, so there's a little bit of an injury concern. Already, that's a stockpiled list of guys, a ton of guys who have injury concerns that are going to be key contributors in your defense. And if a lot of those guys go out at the same time, you do have an attrition problem when it comes to your defense. Now, as far as Takk McKinley, he's a part of that attrition solution. So, yeah, he will be a factor, because you never know who's going to be out from a day-to-day basis. And when you're backing up a guy like Jadeveon Clowney, you want to make sure the backup is solid. So, yeah, there is some concern there. But I do think Takk will be back, and he'll be relatively ready to play by the time the season starts. Now, as far as the defense being top 10, this is all relative again. If they can stay healthy, they'll definitely be top 10, because they do have, I think, top 10 talent on this defense. But I think the bigger question for this defense isn't will they be top 10 caliber, is how healthy can this defense be? How fortunate can they get? Because, again, a lot of guys have a long injury history on this defense, and it would be a little foolish to assume that that's just going to go away because it's 2021. Though that history is going to follow these guys, that's probably not going to go away. So how well are they built out to withstand this attrition? That's the bigger question, and I'm far less clear on that than I am about what they have on paper when it comes to the starting lineup. So that might be something that keeps them out of the top 10 for the entire year, because they might have stretches of the year where they don't have a remotely healthy defense. But I think if they have everybody out there, yeah, they're top 10. But that's a big question mark. The next question comes from Jarrett Kent, who says, with JOK's speed and tackling, is he going to be able to spy Lamar, and is that even how you would want to use him versus the Ravens? I would not want to use JOK like that. I think asking somebody like JOK to spy him might make a lot of sense just from like a paper standpoint, but I don't think JOK, even though he's a great athlete, is somebody you want to be just solely reacting to Lamar. I want Lamar Jackson to react to where JOK is at. I want JOK to anticipate where Lamar Jackson is going to be at, and I want him to be able to do what he does best, which is anticipate, react, and tackle, right? That's what he does best. You want him to be able to anticipate. If you put him in a spy, you take away that ability to anticipate, and all he can do is react, and that might not be as successful. For what Lamar Jackson does, I think the every once in a while TFL on a run play for him is a lot more effective than just slowing him down to 3 or 4 yards to carry, right? So if you can get JOK to be in the right spot to get a TFL every once in a while, I think that's going to do a lot more damage to the defense. So I wouldn't necessarily spy him. I don't know if you spy versus Lamar. I think you just scheme versus Lamar. And I think a spy is a really lazy way to scheme against Lamar, just because there's nobody in the universe who's going to be able to spy him and react and be one-on-one with Lamar Jackson. We have to give him credit where credit is due. He's probably one of the more special athletes there is in the NFL when it comes to running the football, if not the most special. So I don't think spying him is as effective as some people want to make it out to seem, but I do think you have to effectively scheme against him. And how do you do that? You let your players who can anticipate and react and put him in the right positions to get an occasional TFL on him, which will push him behind the sticks, which will take him out their game plan, and then hopefully you capitalize with the offense. The next question comes from Ben Smith, who says, is Grant Delpit in bubble wrap until week 1, or will we see him in a preseason game? If he has a healthy week of practice, you'll see him in a preseason game. I'm pretty sure of that. He's not good enough or not established enough on this roster yet to just be put on bubble wrap like an Odell or Jarvis or Baker or anybody else, or Myles Garrett, right? He's not good enough to be put on bubble wrap. So if he's able to go out there, if they feel good about throwing him out there, he'll go out there. And he probably needs a healthy week of practice. It's unfortunate that he came back from this injury a little early and he keeps getting nicked up. He can't get a healthy week of practice. It really is unfortunate, but hopefully he can get a healthy week of practice in a preseason game and before the season starts. Next question comes from Wesley Johnson, who says, coming in this year, knowing how competitive our division is, can you name a new player on each team that can be a deciding factor on if we beat the Steelers, Ravens, and Bengals? For the Steelers, this is kind of a cheat because it's not a new player, but the return of Devin Bush, you can also throw Joe Schobert, that combination of linebackers in there. Is that enough support to supplement the weaknesses that they have in their back end? I think that'd be a huge question for them. Maybe you can add Najee Harris in there too. Is he enough to give them a run game? I don't necessarily think so, but he's somebody you can throw in there. For the Ravens, if he plays at the early part of the season and it doesn't look like he's going to play, I would have said Rashad Bateman, but I still think by the time they get to the Cleveland Browns game, Rashad Bateman will be playing. Rashad Bateman, I think he's the real deal as a wide receiver. I think he might be the first home run the Ravens hit in the first round with the wide receiver. And for the Bengals, who is the guy for the Bengals? I want to say Joe Burrow, but he's obviously not new. Whoever, Riley Reef, the whatever the solution was on the offensive line for the Cincinnati Bengals, whatever new guys are supposed to be that solution, that would be the most important factor when it comes to the Bengals' ability to keep up or beat the Browns. So that's what I'll go with there. The next question comes from Just Me, who says, since the season has been extended, should rosters be increased? I don't know if rosters should be increased, but I do think that they should bring back the rule from last year or expand upon the rule from last year that allowed teams to kind of have more of a developmental roster, a group of players that you can keep, maybe 6 or 10 guys on top of the practice squad that can be brought up but are part of the roster so other teams can't poach them, but don't count towards that active 53-man total. I think that's what they should do. They should invest in some kind of developmental squad and allow teams to not have to fear. Like if you have a third-round draft pick who's not going to get playing time, maybe he doesn't need to make the 53-man roster, but you don't want to cut him and risk losing him on the practice squad to a team that needs him actively. So you can have another spot to put him. That's what I would have, right? A developmental spot for a team. So you can put like 5 to 10 players on there that can't be poached by other teams, will get their full, regular season salary, can be brought up if need be, but also are protected in that way. So that's what I would say they should have done with the extending of the regular season. The last question comes from Sam Franklin, who says, just started watching your channel. My question is, what are you doing for yourself to keep yourself from getting overhyped for this season? I'm struggling to not expect the Super Bowl. I think it's okay to have expectations of a Super Bowl, but let me be very clear on what I mean by expectations of a Super Bowl. You're not entitled to a Super Bowl just because you have a team that can contend for a Super Bowl, right? But I think you should strap yourself in and prepare yourself for the ride, right? Let's see where this ride goes. I have talked about ad nauseum how making these predictions at the beginning of the year, they're fun and they're entertaining, and that's why I do them. But ultimately, they don't really hold that much weight, just because when it comes down to it, you could predict the team to go 10-6, and they can go 10-6. But if the ride goes one way, you'll be very disappointed with that 10-6. Or if the ride goes another way, you'll be very excited about 10-6, right? It's all about the ride. The result and your happiness with that result is all dictated on how the ride gets you to that result, and what happened and what was avoidable and what was not. So that's kind of how I would view it, right? Don't think about this as the end result being what you need. And if you don't get that end result that you feel like you're entitled to, then you're going to be upset. Think about it as strapping yourself in for this ride, and just seeing where it goes and seeing where it takes you, because ultimately that's what this is all about. Have fun, enjoy it. But that's my thoughts on these questions. But let me know your thoughts on these questions down in the comment section below. Again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.